Welcome back to the Blockfield podcast. We have a special guest today. We have Zach Townsend of Meanwhile. Meanwhile is based in Bermuda, one of the coolest companies. We just had to get you on it. We've been talking about this for a few months. I think it's the first, definitely the most well-known and excited one that we've touched on, but Bitcoin infused life insurance. Would love for you just to introduce yourself and then we'll dive deeper into it. But you have some really impressive investors, including Sam Altman, and a number of others.
Cool. Yeah, as you mentioned, we are, to our knowledge, the only life insurance company entirely operating a digital asset. We are entirely in Bitcoin. So it's actually a subsidiary of our parent company in Bermuda, and it is a licensed and regulated life insurance company, and it operates entirely in Bitcoin. So people pay us premiums in Bitcoin, we pay out our claims in Bitcoin, and then we do all the insurance mumbo jumbo in between in Bitcoin, right? So we do our solvency calcs and our reserves, all the actuarial stuff, our financials, everything's in Bitcoin. And what's nice about that from both our perspective and the user's perspective is that because we're making promises in Bitcoin and we're only taking Bitcoin, we don't have to worry about the price or exchange rate of Bitcoin because all of our assets and liabilities are matched. So it's like we're running the company in euros or yen or Swiss francs or dollars. It's just all in Bitcoin. And we feel that we look out 10, 20, 30 years, and we believe there's going to be a robust, functioning, global economy based on Bitcoin, separate from any country, but really built on the ideas of self-sovereignty and decentralization. And we believe that economy is going to have every big financial institution. So there'll be exchanges and there'll be payments companies and there'll be banks. And we think there'll be an insurance company, a life insurance company. And in the traditional economy, life insurance is about 2% of global GDP is life insurance premiums. It's a pretty big business. And we think and hope it'll be a pretty big business in Bitcoin land too.
I guess before we get a lot deeper into that, Zach, on the Meanwhile side, just looking at your background, I had a stint at McKinsey doing fintech in North America. You had an acquisition with Standard Treasury, a banking service platform, and then you also served as the chief data officer of the state of California. So you're both
What,
in the
what my
arena.
wife would say is, I'm not very good at keeping a job other than the companies I serve. So I've had a varied experience.
But out of all these, what do you feel different positions you've drawn on to get you to where you are now? Okay, each of these little lessons I've learned from these positions have set me up to run Meanwhile and start a first of its kind market, Bitcoin-denominated life insurance.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. When we sat down to start this business, one of the things, like I said, actually, what we did is we were sitting down and we said, hey, there's going to be this robust crypto economy. What needs to exist? And we actually listed out all the possible financial institutions. And I think that one thing about my background and my co-founder's background is we're really comfortable with, I guess, a certain type of pain. And that pain is regulatory pain, and regulatory conversations are really fine for us. So we thought that was a real comparative advantage for us, is that we are able to deal with. We spent a whole year just writing a business plan and appendices and policies and all this stuff to get this company going. And I think that having a background in fintech, doing actually two different stints over my career in government service, but also working at Stripe and founding and selling a company, these things all add up to me at that intersection of being really interested in actually financial inclusion and how do we build financial services for as many people as possible. And the second is comfort in government speak and regulation and dealing with paperwork. And then the third is dealing with technology and thinking about new problems in those perspectives. And I see that my career is bouncing around those different things, but then hope to bring that together in this company.
So you got, as I mentioned earlier, you got Sam Altman and a number of very prominent investors. Is this just nepotism through the years being involved and knowing these folks, or was there something that moment where you attracted a lot of these investors to have this novel idea?
Yeah, I think it does always help to be a second time founder. I went through YC with my first company, and I was backed by Andreessen Horowitz and Index Ventures and other folks. We definitely, when we started the fundraise way back in January 2022 for the first seed round, we did start with a bunch of angels, people that we knew. I knew Parker Conrad and Dylan Field and these big names that could write 2,500K. Sam was a little unusual. I think Sam is really attracted to really big ideas. I don't know Sam particularly well. He was a part-time partner when I went through IC, like we'd certainly know, I certainly know his name, but like he knows who I am, but we aren't like friends or buddies or stayed in touch or anything. And I think that when we were fundraising for this idea, at the end of the day, we talk about what we're doing with investors, not as just we want to build the world's largest life insurance company. I talk about trying to reach 1 billion users. And the way you do that is you reach those people with digital money and you can service them profitably using technology and artificial intelligence. And I think that ambition really resonates with Sam. Like he just likes investing in companies that have really big goals. Sam and I had a 30 or 45-minute conversation. He asked some really pointed questions. He's a really sharp guy. And at the end of that, he asked if he could co-lead with Lockie Groom, who's a really prominent solo capitalist. And that was our first round. And then I think that was like $7 million raised. And then I think for the sort of second seed, which was early in 2023, so post FTX, I think that was built on having got the license. We hadn't yet operationalized the company. We had done something that I think a lot of people would have thought was impossible, which is we got a well-respected insurance regulator to look at our business plan, say it makes sense, and to give us the green light to go ahead. And that's how we ended up with like Gradient, which is Google's AI venture arm, and Moral Capital from Santander, and MS&AD, which is a big insurance company, Hudson Structured, which is an insurance reinsurance folks, Stillmark, which is amazing Bitcoin-focused fund. We definitely, I think for crypto folks, we're very interesting because we're doing something innovative in insurance. I think for insurance folks, we're really interesting because we're doing something innovative using crypto. But I think at the end of the day, that round came together because of getting the license. The way we think of it is like 2022 was all about getting a license. 2023 in the end was actually all about operationalizing. We had to build a policy admin system and know your customer anti-money laundering systems. And we had to write 17 policies and have an independent board and all that stuff added up. And then really late in the year, we bound our first policies. So we're like now really an insurance company, a life insurance company. And we're off to the races here in January and hopefully Q1 and in working with folks to become policyholders and launching this company.
It's fascinating. And I think the strategic investors you guys got, I'd imagine, is helpful in knocking on some of these doors with regulators and being able to get a seat at the table with some of those folks. Now, what are the challenges that you foresee? Is it mostly on the regulatory side, or I don't know if Northwestern Mutual or some of these other folks are knocking on your door to potentially get involved in any capacity?
Yeah, future challenges is we're making a bet, right? We think that this cycle in Bitcoin or crypto is going to be like a more institutional cycle. It's going to be a cycle where people are really interested in doing more institutional things. And we're definitely positioning the company and ourselves as, hey, crypto is more than just altcoins and speculation and trading. It's a real financial system. And you should do boring things with some of your Bitcoin. Buy a life insurance policy, because you look out, again, 10, 20, 30 years, we think there'll be a Bitcoin economy, but also we think Bitcoin will be worth a lot more. And life insurance provides real protection for your family or your loved ones. It has a bunch of tax advantages. So we think that'll resonate with users, and it has been resonating with them to date. When we look out to the next steps, we have a Bermuda company, again, regulated, very respectable jurisdiction, but ultimately people are buying from us offshore. And that really means that our customer base right now is like high net worth individuals, crypto whales on the one hand, and like rich people who have some crypto on the other. Our ultimate dream is that if you're live in Argentina, which is a country with a ton of inflation and currency risk and regime risk, that you could buy a life insurance policy from us, or people feel that way about the United States and you're doing that. And that is a regulatory slog. It's actually not, I wouldn't call it difficult. It's complex, but it's not really difficult. But starting a carrier in the US or Argentina or Dubai or Singapore. These are all things in our roadmap. And those are regulatory barriers. They make the company more valuable, but they also mean we can sell to more people in different ways. So when I look out to our next horizon, the number one thing is to sell the product we have. But also, then there's like getting more licenses to sell in more places. And then the third horizon is just that, like, look, we think life insurance, it sounds really boring, but these are core financial needs. Like, what happens to my loved one if I die before I'm supposed to? Or how do I save for my retirement? Or what savings look like? And that's really what like annuities are about, is actually like what happens if you live longer than you're supposed to, and annuities are supposed to take care of you. We see really an endless list of products to bring to market. I don't want to say copy is the wrong word, but actually reimagining in like simpler and better terms these classic products using Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the three horizons we think of.
I actually presented on you guys a local like Bend Bitcoin meetup, and I was doing a broader presentation on Bitcoin related financial services. And we have a group that's very much believers in the Bitcoin standard and a Bitcoin circular economy of like bartering and trading, using Bitcoin as like a bearer asset and means of exchange. But I think for a lot of the audience, they still like maybe a little bit new to like life insurance and want to learn the mechanics of it. And so I did as best job as explaining as I could, but would love to, in your words, what would, in that scenario, talking to people that are native to Bitcoin, like what are the benefits and what are the things that they need to think about? Because not everyone, people are now starting to think about succession planning and different tax advantages, but many haven't reached that point. So it'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, let me be candid and I'll give you like all the pluses and then I'll give you like some of the areas of concern that people have. So the benefits of so our current policy, it's called whole life, and it's well named. So it lasts your whole life. And and I hope I'm not the bearer of bad news here, we will all eventually die. That means that there will eventually be a payout, right? So there's other types of life insurance like accidental death or term life that like term life lasts a certain term, right? Whole life lasts your whole life. So in that way, we're making a promise and like it will eventually be paid out. And then our product's called limited pay. So basically what that means is you're not paying forever. In our case, you are paying for 10 years. So you might pay half a Bitcoin a year for 10 years. So that's 5 Bitcoin paid in. And then we make your promise to your beneficiaries. Maybe that's 7, 8, 10 Bitcoin. It depends how old you are and how healthy you are. People can also pay upfront if they want, but it's primarily a 10 pay, so you're paying over time. And then the benefits of the policy are basically threefold. And just to be clear, these are like the benefits of all whole life policies. It just happens to be that our policies are denominated in Bitcoin, but we've gone out of our way to comply with all the tax rules to make sure that you get the same benefits as a normal whole life policy. So the first is protection, right? So that's what insurance is about on some level. So if you die tomorrow and even if you only paid one premium, then you get that 8. So there's protection for your entire life. Obviously, it's a worse deal if you live to 120, but you are getting protection that entire time in case you die. The second is you could think that like we're turning 5 into 8 and we're doing that. We can talk about how we're doing that we're getting yields in Bitcoin. And even if you thought that you could get the exact same yields as us, we would be like compounding those yields tax-free. So again, that 5 into 8 is a higher ratio than you get if you like invested the Bitcoin yourself in the same way we are, because we're doing that compounding in this tax wrapped thing. And then the third is, and this excites a lot of people, what again, just a classic benefit of whole life is what's called a policy loan. You can borrow against the value in your policy. So you could think we're promising you put in 5, we're promising you 8, and it's like accumulating over time. You have what's called a surrender value, but you could think of that as like an account value. And you can borrow value out of the policy. But the cool thing about borrowing value out of our policy is you're borrowing it in Bitcoin. So although you might put in that 5 Bitcoin when Bitcoin cost 40,000, if Bitcoin were 400,000 or $4 million, you could borrow 1 Bitcoin out and it would be like you're getting a new Bitcoin with a new tax basis. So we really talk about the product as a HODL product. Like it's really about intergenerational wealth transfer. It's like intergenerational savings. But then there's this optional tax-free liquidity. And I think I actually was just on Twitter today and someone was talking about diversifying your Bitcoin holdings. Like you should have some in a hardware wallet, you should have some at this custodian, you should have some at that custodian. And that's really what we're seeing from a lot of our customers is we don't suggest anyone take their whole stack and put in a life insurance policy. But we think that putting 5% of your stack or 10% of your stack into a life insurance policy can make a lot of sense. It's diversification and you're getting these good tax benefits. Let me talk about the things that make people uncomfortable though, right? Like we're doing in some ways all the things that people don't like in Bitcoin, right? So you send us the Bitcoin, right? So you might be transferring from self-custody to us. We use Anchorage, which we think is the like most secure centralized custodian. We're really comfortable with them. But again, like we are doing the custody and then we take your Bitcoin and everyone else, all our other policy Bitcoin, all the other Bitcoin from all our other policyholders. And that's a hypothecation, right? So that's uncomfortable. And then the third thing is how do we turn 5 into 8? Actually, we lend Bitcoin to other people. We've been doing that for 2 years. We've gotten about 3% returns in Bitcoin. So we're like super conservative. Like we're not going for 10% returns or 15% returns. Our target IRR is 3%. And we've gotten actually 3.1, 3.2 returns. And we had no credit losses over 2 years. So obviously that includes a time period with Genesis and Celsius and Voyager and 3AC. And partially that's because we need a low yield and we're like just super conservative. And we ask a lot of questions like, oh, are you doing DeFi? Are you doing wrap Bitcoin? Like actually not. We're not willing to take on those risks right now. Like we are lending Bitcoin to institutional counterparties and we're negotiating master lending agreements and like where are we in your bankruptcy stack and what's all the collateral against this, and people want to put us in like some crappy subsidiary as our counterparty and we're like, no, we want all of your entire company and its asset. So we have a private credit operation, and I think that that's the overall arching, you said it actually, Jody, is we want to be Bitcoin financial services, but in particular, we want to be the like boring, long-term, conservative Bitcoin financial services. So I like to say there are a lot of people in the high risk liquid space. You're getting high yields, you're like doing wrap Bitcoin, you're putting it on some L2 protocol I've never heard of, and you're levering it up and you're doing this and you're doing that. That's not our business. Our business is we want to be the like boring part of crypto, and like life insurance is boring and like private credit is boring, but we think that crypto needs that. We think it needs both, but we also think that we can play this role and be an important long-term financial institution in crypto and in Bitcoin in particular. And that's anyway, I'm off on a tangent, but back to, so there are these benefits and it's definitely about like savings and compounding and protection and tax advantage. And then there are these things that make people uncomfortable, which is like custody and hypothecation and lending. And what we find is like in every Bitcoiner's heart, there's just a love of self-custody against a hatred of taxes. And people find a balance. And so far, we've succeeded in getting a bunch of users to say, again, we're not asking anyone to give us 100 Bitcoin or the whole stack or whatever, but take a portion of that Bitcoin, start paying us over 10 years for all these benefits.
So Jody was talking to me, trying to convince me to go to a Dogecoin life insurance policy. Tried to vie him away from that. No, but obviously Bitcoin's the most well-known. But beyond that,
we actually have to ask ourselves the question, what's going to be here in 50 years, 100 years? Like literally, we already have, on a statistical basis, we have written a policy to someone who will live longer than me. Just if you think I have a probability distribution of dying, and the people we've sold to have a probability distribution of dying, and just naturally, one of those people will live longer than me. And so I look out over the ecosystem, and actually the only one I'm comfortable with right now in saying I would denominate a policy that's going to pay out in 50, 60, 70 years is Bitcoin. I would say if you really pressed me, I would probably say it could make sense, and maybe we'll eventually do it, to have an ETH company. But even that, I'm a little unsure. If you think of the utility of ETH as like being a computational platform, I understand it's number two. It's been there the longest. But on that use case, people, I don't have a dog in this race. But if someone wants to argue about whether Solana or Avalanche or something will overtake ETH, I don't feel as confident in saying it absolutely will still be here in 50 years. Whereas Bitcoin, I think, as like a collective shared store of value, which by the way is just like great for life insurance, right? What is life insurance but a long-term store of value?
Yeah.
I feel really confident in like Bitcoin will persist. And once we can get that confidence in some other coin or other token, like we probably have the infrastructure to do insurance in that token too.
Yeah,
But
it's kind of
I guess what I'll say is Dogecoin not on that list.
not on the list. No,
I don't feel like maybe I'm wrong, but we should talk again in 10 years. But I'm
yeah.
not I'm not yet ready to say it'll be here in 50, 60, 70 years.
Yeah. If you really think about the logic behind Bitcoin, it actually makes almost more sense than the dollar-backed life insurance, where inflation we're seeing in other countries, as you mentioned. Bitcoin is an interesting area. Now, there still is some volatility. Can you just talk a little bit more about the mechanics of how, hey, I'm gonna something like life insurance, you don't want to do anything risky. So how do you guys deal with that volatility if there's a flash crash or anything like that?
Yeah. For us, it doesn't matter. I don't even really pay attention to the day-to-day price because, again, all our promises and all the money we receive is in Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin's at 40,000 or 15,000 or 60,000, those are just some prices it's had over me running this company for 2 years. You could think that like our balance sheet, the account values for our customers, it just has stayed the same. It's number on the spreadsheet and the policy. I don't want to understate, but those numbers are all steady. So again, I think the relevant question for our users, the relevant question for us is, will Bitcoin exist in 50 years? And will it be more valuable than it is today? And of those two things, I feel really confident. And I think asking our users to be confident in that prediction is quite reasonable. What is Bitcoin going to do today, tomorrow, this month, next month, this year? I don't know. If I knew, I would be making a lot of money doing that, but I don't know. But I believe in this technology. I believe in it as a store of value and as money, as a currency. Just I think as the Satoshi's white paper talks about. And I think it'll be a more valuable currency decade over decade, even if it isn't necessarily year over year. And those are the terms that we have to think.
Got it.
Yeah, it sounds like too, it's interesting with both Ethereum and the US government. There's like this massive, if you're thinking really long term, there's this massive risk of Ethereum could change their product roadmap or their tokenomics or the centralization of it. And then you have the US government, who a lot of people, especially in the Bitcoin community, feel like there's no way we continue on current debt levels without inflating in the future, which would inflate away traditional life insurance policy denominated by the dollar. And so you guys, yeah, it makes sense to like keep everything in Bitcoin, but you certainly have to have investors and everyone patient as you work through these periods. I think the biggest thing recently with Bitcoin we'd love to ask you about is just the ETFs, like leading up to those, certainly a lot of fanfare. Do you feel like, I guess more so instead of leading, what would you say like short-term and maybe medium-term impacts of the ETFs?
Oh, I really have no idea. Again, I try not to make predictions. What I'll say is we bought a bunch of Bitcoin, earlier this month before the ETFs get approved. But again, I think we bought it thinking like, where is the price of Bitcoin going to be in 5 years? Not where is it going to be in 5 months. If I was forced to make a prediction, I think you're going to see this balancing around 40 for a little bit as holders of Grayscale, types of holders in Grayscale want to get out and liquidate, counterbalanced with people who are buying the ETF. So you do see the inflows to all ETFs are higher than the outflows from Grayscale. But I think that those things will just counteract each other for a little bit. But at the end of the day, registered investment advisors, they are not the type of people who just all do the same thing on the same day and get all of their clients to switch to having 50 basis points or 1% of their portfolio in this ETF. So what you're going to see over this year is that as part of the regular, like quarterly conversations investment advisors have with their clients, that there'll be just a steady drumbeat of increasing value inside the ETFs. And I think that ultimately that combined with the types of like genuine building that we and other people are doing in Bitcoin will lead that to be the price being higher. But I could not possibly say where it'll be again, any day or any month. I don't know. Otherwise,
I
I'd
guess
be again doing a bunch of basis trading.
yeah, maybe the more interesting question there, and I piggyback would be like, have you seen more inflows like this ETF kind of given people on the institutional side the long-term thinking that hey, this is going to stick around now that these institutions are here?
Yeah,
Have
yeah.
you seen more activity on your end?
Look, I think we're like selling policies person by person and like really just started like late last year. So yeah, I've sold more policies this month than last month, but I have no idea if that's because of the ETF or just because I've talked to more people this month than last month. But I do think to the institutional point, yeah, it's certainly the case. We're getting more inbound interest in people wanting to invest in the company to help us build infrastructure. I think our private credit work, that is like our insurance company lends Bitcoin to other people and gets yield in Bitcoin. I think that doing that potentially is like an asset management play for other people. That's something we announced that we were looking to do in December. I think is more institutional interest in that. Again, I think this is going to be a cycle that's driven more by, like institutions getting interested, start like conversations around like portfolio theory and like diversification and different types of strategies than some of the past cycles, which I think have half been built on retail exuberance around things that maybe didn't have a lot of value or a lot of like trading and active management of funds. I think that, yeah, I hope that this is again, a cycle where we're just focused on building for the long term.
On the side of succession planning and looking at how moving or estate planning and how looking at tax advantage strategies, like what other, I think people that aren't familiar with that space as much or haven't thought about it, what are some other interesting like tax shelters or related products that you guys are interested in? You don't have to commit to anything, but I think it's fascinating to see what could be done in something that's Bitcoin denominated.
Yeah. So look, I'm not an estate lawyer and I'm not an accountant, but it is certainly the case that when you have an asset and you've maxed out your 401k, your IRA, like life insurance is often next on the list. But then you get into all sorts of complicated stuff of which I'm not an expert. Do you have a grantor trust, a non-grantor trust? How do you get assets into those trusts? GRATs, I don't even know, guaranteed retainer or something trust. I guess the first sort of thing is just like having a will, particularly if you live in states with complex probate like California, but a bunch of other states. But you're absolutely right that like we're having this conversation with folks and it prompts all this thinking for them, like about succession and estate planning and tax planning. And I think a lot of early Bitcoiners, a lot of early crypto folks, they're aging in to like our core demographic right now. There's two different ones, but like one of them is like early crypto person or like person in crypto. And they did that in their 20s. And now they're like in their 30s, they're getting married, maybe they've had a kid or two, their kids are young. I guess this might describe you.
Yeah, I was just about to say this is us.
It just describes a lot of people.
We might do it.
And then we come and say, hey, well, we have a product that people of all types use for protection for their family, and then it also has these tax benefits. And yeah, that prompts all sorts of thinking, like, oh man, I don't have a estate, I don't have a trust, I don't have all this stuff. And yeah, we can refer people to others. We're not in that business in the sense that that's something you really, again, need to talk to an accountant about or a tax and estate planning lawyer. But we do definitely see the product we have as like an element in that thing. I do think this highlights, though, that getting good advice, if you're like a crypto native person, it's hard. It's still early days, right? Mm-hmm. I talk to a lot of people on like they just getting even investment advice beyond crypto. It's my uncle referred me to his investment advisor, and he can't like spell Bitcoin, let alone help me think about it. So I don't think that's a business that we're in today, going to be in today. But I do think there's a lot of like advisor here, advisor there. But like that strikes me as something that somebody needs to really tackle. Is like how to provide financial, tax, estate planning advice specifically for crypto folks.
Mm-hmm.
I just say we have a whole other persona that you should think of as like a family office or someone from tech. And they've often already done that planning. They have a will, they have trust, they might have this thing or that thing. But nobody used their trust to buy their Bitcoin because it was like this weird asset. So I think that actually when we talk to those people, like I've talked to customers, potential policyholders who have 9 figures in life insurance. They don't need to be convinced about life insurance. And then we're arriving and be like, hey, we have a life insurance product for your Bitcoin. And these people aren't like diehard Bitcoiners. They own 10, 20 Bitcoin because what if it takes over the world? And for those people, it's much more, oh, here's this box you already know about. And you can put your Bitcoin in it because you did not use your transfer tax exemption or whatever that is on your Bitcoin because that didn't make sense in 2017 when it was such a risky asset. But now it's appreciated so much that you don't want to do that.
So you mentioned you're like the first and only right now. Does that have any sense of fear for you? Because sometimes if there's a competitor, it validates the market. Now, I think you mentioned some bigger names last time we spoke that have been knocking on your door with interest. I don't know if that's from like a partnership perspective, or I mentioned like Northwestern Mutual or some of the bigger New York Life and MetLife. And I'm trying to think if all those guys do life insurance, but I'm assuming I know
Mass Mutual. They all have a similar name. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. When are those folks, have they started to look into spinning up a unit that focuses on Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Would they be something like knocking on your door for partnerships?
Yeah. Look, I think we're in a really fortunate position. They'll eventually become a competitor, of course. But if you're like a crypto native degen or whatever, the regulatory slog we've gone through just doesn't sound very attractive. And if you're an existing carrier, it's actually just really hard to hold such a volatile asset on your balance sheet. There are all these rules about how you like count your investments and whether they're qualified or unqualified or exempt or unexempt, like how much capital you have to hold. And Bitcoin is just really onerous to own for an incumbent insurer. So I think that in that sense, we do think that incumbents are more likely to partner. And yeah, some have reached out to us. We have some product ideas we'd love to bring to market in partnership with an incumbent carrier. But yeah, I think we don't worry about them developing the crypto expertise, because I think there's some structural barriers. And we don't really worry about Coinbase waking up and deciding to develop insurance expertise. I think as we're more successful, what will happen is that there'll be another venture-backed crypto life insurance company. And I think we'll have a multi-year advantage just because it takes time. But that'll happen. And look, back to my like very early analogy that we think there'll be a big, robust crypto economy and it'll be global and owned by no one and controlled by no single country. And that'll be a really interesting, important, and robust economy in the world. And no giant developed economy has one life insurance company. We expect competitors and we're not afraid of them.
Love it. Real quick, how'd you come up with the name? Meanwhile, where's that stem from?
Yeah, actually, as I forget, I think Jody mentioned my first company was called Standard Treasury, and for a little while we were just calling it Standard. But and we own Standard.re, but we're not a reinsurer. We just bought that domain, and basically we realized that actually the people who own Standard.com is an insurance company called The Standard. It's like the biggest insurance company in the Northwest. And there's Standard Chartered, and there's Standard Bank of Africa. So it was just like a really messy trademark situation. And like we were never going to own that space. So we basically needed to come up with a new name. And we came up with hundreds of words. And Meanwhile really stuck with us. I wanted a name that if you hear it, you can spell it. And if you see it, you can read it and know how to say it. So that crosses off a ton of things. And the third is we wanted a .com, and which we were able to buy meanwhile.com. And we probably would have gone with a lot of things that met that. Actually, we love the name Meanwhile because it's like you live your life. Meanwhile, like we are protecting you or we're protecting your family. Like it's actually like a great financial services brand. And it is completely like what you really want in a new brand is it's an empty vessel. The only other thing named Meanwhile is a brewery in Austin, Texas, actually near
I've
like
been
where my
there.
house is.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, good brewery. But they've got their trademark for whatever breweries, and we have the financial services trademarks. And we feel like you want that empty space. Someone said to us once, a new name is it's a walnut, not an oak tree. And but you also don't want to be in a dense forest. So we're really happy with it.
I guess my last question is for you building a team, what's that been like? Because you need to find people that understand insurance first and foremost, but then you also need people to commit their careers on the digital asset Bitcoin side.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'd say, let me answer that two different ways. The first is just importantly, you don't have to convince everyone in the world. You just have to convince enough people, right? So we have a head of insurance. His name's Jim Cristallo. He led all these different business units in New York Life. He became the leader of the individual life insurance business. He's an actuary by background, and he's just amazing. He's a Bitcoiner. He loves it. And he's like really well connected in the space, and he's really into it. And he sits down, he does the work, like the actuarial modeling work that he hasn't done in 20 years or 15 years. And he's just great. He's just wonderful. And the point is, we didn't need to convince every business leader or actuary at New York Life. We need to convince like the one guy, and he is the right guy, and he works for us. It hasn't been that difficult. You get a lot of no's, but you just need to, again, get like one yes for each position with someone who's world class. Second thing I'll say though is just like building a company like this, it's a lot of management of the culture, right? So we have 8 people on the team. We have a private credit guy. We have 2 actuaries. We have 2 engineers. Like it's just like a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different knowledge bases, a lot of different ways of talking about things. I'll give an example, actually, the word product. In insurance, the word product like really specifically means the like insurance thing. What's the contract say and how does it work? But of course, like for the tech folks, when you say product, we actually mean the whole thing. We mean what's the user experience, what's the design, and you have to manage like that. That might sound like a stupid example, but just like these, what words mean and how you talk about things. And we just try to be very conscious and conscientious of that. And like when we're talking, to have a culture where people like speak up and say, oh, that didn't make sense to me. But I think that'll continue to be like an imperative of the company. And we have some written down values that we all agreed upon. And the first one is build for the long term, right? Because that's what an insurance company is. It's about long term. And I won't go through them all, but one of them is about like being curious. And partially we mean that in like being individually curious about like your work, but also being curious with each other about what you know, how you think about the world and what your perspectives are. And I think that ethos is something that's going to be really important for us because we have so many people who come from different places and different backgrounds and different expertise.
That's cool. Especially keep you grounded. Hey, we need a team that's okay with 3% returns, and you just hang on. The Bitcoin economy is coming and there's going to be growth. It's not a day-to-day price action. It's more of a year-to-year thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, building for the long term. If you compound 3% returns in Bitcoin forever, I think we'll do really well. And if we chase 10% Bitcoin returns, we'll probably blow ourselves up. And first and foremost, it's just a little different, right? Like I know it sounds like a weird mix. Like we're trying to be in crypto, but conservative, right? And again, I think that's what crypto needs. I think that's going to be really valuable. But back to your culture or your point about people, like it's a certain type. Like I think there are people who that really resonates with. And actually there are some more like crypto degen types where we're like, or even some investors where they're like, hey, I've made tons and tons of money on tokens going up 5,000%. And we're just like, hey, we're going to we think we can have serious growth, but it is serious growth on a prudent, risk managed foundation. And that's not for everyone. And that's fine. Again, it just has to be the right thing for enough people.
Yeah. No, I think I'm just thinking about like traditional assets, how people manage their portfolios even, right? You're not putting the base of your investments into like very high risk things. You'll maybe take a few dollars here and there, but something like life insurance, pretty straightforward. You don't want to be playing risky assets in that for sure. No, I'm excited about what you guys are going to be building. I think it sounds fascinating. I don't think we've heard of any other company doing that. So glad we finally had a chance to connect here. But you guys are in the middle of raising, I think 100 million I saw an article about, right?
Yeah, for the credit vehicle.
Okay.
And it's going. We'll see.
That's awesome. Just to wrap it up, what are you most excited for? It could be your brand and company related over the next couple months,
Yeah.
or could be completely far left field. You're going to Thailand. You're super excited about that trip. Most excited about the future here.
Yeah, look, I will take the company and just say we have been building for 2 years. I think that's a thing you like in regulated industries and fintech and insurtech. You often have this lead time, right? So all of 2022 was about getting licensed. 2023 was about operationalizing that license and launching. So I'm really excited about 2024 here is we are actually like talking to users and working with them to become policyholders. And I'm here on this in this conversation, and I get to have other conversations over the course of the year. And that is really exciting. Like it is different. Like we've been toiling away out of you, and now we get to talk to people about what we're building and hopefully get to celebrate them wanting it.
Love it. Thanks for coming on, Zach. This was a pleasure.
Yeah, exciting stuff.
So happy to be here and have this conversation and great questions and look forward to staying in touch.